This is Bill Paul with Earth Preservers. For our Newsmaker interview today, we talked to Bill McKibben, co-founder and director of 350.org, the influential advocacy group in favor of a very green economy and planet. As much as it's been in the news, take a second, back us up for people who haven't been following this, and explain exactly what Keystone is and exactly why it should not be built, in your opinion.
Sure. It's a plan for a pipeline that comes out of the tar sands of Canada, and it would carry this oil down to the Gulf of Mexico, where it would be shipped abroad to be burned. Now, it's a poor idea because for many reasons. One, they're doing horrible disruptions of that landscape up there where the oil's coming from. They've moved more earth than they moved to build the Suez Canal and the Great Wall of China and the 10 biggest dams on earth, and they've only gotten to about 3% of the oil. Two, it's very risky all along the 1,700-mile length of this pipeline. The chance for spills seems very large. The much smaller precursor pipeline that they built last year leaked 12 times in the first year. But three, the biggest reason to oppose it probably is because those tar sands are the second biggest pool of carbon on Earth after only the oil fields of Saudi Arabia. If we could burn them heavily, tap them heavily, on top of all the other things that we're doing, our leading climate scientist, Jim Hansen at NASA, said it'll be essentially game over for the climate. That's how he put it. And that's why it led to the biggest environmental uprising in probably 15 or 20 years in this country. 1,253 people who were arrested committing civil disobedience, and many thousands of young people, especially ringing the White House with their bodies. And so far, the pipeline's been blocked, but of course, Big Oil's trying very hard to push it through.
Do you think that the day after the election that pipeline gets approved?
I think it's possible. Environmentalists never win permanent victories, only temporary ones. That's why we have to always keep fighting.
Of course, 100 years ago, when the oil industry was just being born, it made a lot of sense to have those tax breaks in play because drilling for oil was inherently risky.
We didn't know how to do it yet. In the same way that it makes sense to have tax breaks for solar panels right now, because we're still figuring out some of that technology. But it makes no sense to subsidize things we already know how to do. It would be like going to the third grade, every year for the next 10 years. Sooner or later, you got to move on, learn something new.
What would you say to guys, for example, this Larry Kudlow gentleman on CNBC, for whom the system the way it is now is, quote unquote, the free market capitalism at work? In other words, for you to change things is to somehow undermine, quote unquote, free market capitalism.
No, I think that climate change, global warming, is the perfect example of what happens when we don't have capitalism and markets at work. Mm-hmm. Fossil fuel industry, alone among industries, is allowed to pour its waste into the atmosphere for free. Like if you run a restaurant, you can't just every night take all your garbage and shovel it out in the middle of the street. You have to pay someone to take it away because otherwise we'd have rats and things in the street and you'd have a problem. But the fossil fuel industry is allowed to pour all this carbon into the atmosphere. That's what's heating up the planet and causing drought and flood and changing the chemistry of seawater and all those other things. And until they actually have to pay for it, they'll have an unfair advantage competing with things like solar power or wind power or whatever. If we really had a capitalist market in energy, we wouldn't be using much coal and gas and oil because it would be too expensive. It's only because the government protects them that they're able to stay in business in those ways.
Okay, so there have been two options that have been political hot potatoes. One is cap and trade, and one is a carbon flat, a straightforward carbon tax. Both get folks who are not in agreement with you very much up in arms. Is there a third way of looking at that so that those companies start to pay more of their fair share?
I think the wisest way to do it is what people are calling fee and dividend. You put a hefty tax on say, oil at where it comes out of the well. You make Exxon pay a big amount of money for the right to sell this stuff, and then which means that they'll go and raise the price at the gas pump. You'd be paying as much as people pay in Europe, maybe $6 or $7 a gallon. Okay, but you'd take all that money that you collected from Exxon and everybody else who has a oil company, and you'd write a check every month to everybody in America. They'd get back that money. So you'd both get the signal at the pump to change, to stop driving a huge tank around to go for the groceries and, buy a reasonable car. And you'd be made whole against it. This kind of system, and if you Google fee and dividend, you can learn all about it, I think is the best chance we have for making those kind of changes. Economists like it. Oil companies don't like it because they're making record profits right now. Exxon made more money last year than any company in the history of money. So they're loath to change it at all.
Again, playing devil's advocate, how do you counter the counter argument, which is that that's just income redistribution, you're socialistic, and so on?
Well, what it's redistributing is money from oil companies to people. And the question you have to try and figure out is, who owns the sky? If anybody owns the sky, it's probably us, not Exxon. And hence, if they're going to be destroying it, they should be paying us money in the process, sort of renting it, especially since, as I've explained, that'll lead us to use a lot less fossil fuel going forward.
Rank, if you will, environmental concern on voters' lists of concern as they walk into the voting booth this election day. Are you number 1, number 10? Where exactly are you?
No, I think probably people are most concerned about the economy. That's what surveys show. And people always tend to be fixated on things that are happening right here, right now, at this very moment. But of course, people are, complicated, and we're able to think about more than one thing at once. And all of us also care very much about what the world will be like for our kids and our grandkids, which is why, polls show that especially younger voters put the environment very high on their list of concerns. Among young people who voted for Barack Obama in 2008, energy and the environment was the number one issue that they gave for why they were supporting him.
Will they continue to support him like they did in 2008, given the need for the environment to continue to be protected?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. I doubt that there'll be the same kind of fervor around Barack Obama. I think it's important that he do things like this Keystone thing, that he block it in order to help people understand why it's important to keep him in office, if that's what he's going to do.
At what point do the young people for whom green is the default mode of life, at what point do they become the primary decision makers, not just in politics, but in business throughout their lives? So, I mean, you get the sense that most of the opposition is coming from, shall we say, my generation, the over 50 crowd, and that once you start seeing those folks who are in their 20s and probably starting to get in their 30s, we suddenly see things turn on a dime.
Yeah, well, let's hope that A, they move their way up the leadership structure pretty fast, and B, that when they get there, they're still concerned about these things. And those are both important. And I'm work mostly with young people all over the world, and I'm very confident in their commitment on these issues. It's the great pleasure of my life to get to work mostly with people half my age who are doing remarkable things.
So you are seeing that commitment continue?
Very much, and we work in every country on earth except North Korea, and we see it all over the world.
We've been talking primarily about the United States. Again, along the lines of optimism, where might we see the younger generation take hold and push a pro-environmental agenda to the top of the political arena?
You're seeing interesting things going on all over the place. I mean, even in countries like China, which have made a number of environmental mistakes, they've emulated us in putting up coal-fired power plants and things. But you also see them leading the world in installing renewable capacity. It's a very young country, and its young people are in the forefront of this move to put in solar hot water heaters. More than a quarter of China now gets its hot water from solar collectors on the roof. To do all those other kind of things. You see some of the same stuff starting to happen in India. We work with people all around Africa who are doing a beautiful job of figuring out how to try and leapfrog fossil fuel technology the same way that they leapfrogged landline telephones. There's no telephone poles across most of the developing world because everybody just went straight to cell phones. We need to do the same thing with electricity.
Tell me the country we should all be paying attention to that's probably not on anybody's radar screen in terms of how they are making things greener and are changing lifestyles before our eyes.
Well, there are places that are doing good stuff. The Maldive Islands in the Indian Ocean, a Muslim country on the equator, is supposedly pledged to be fully 100% carbon neutral by 2020. They're putting up windmills and things quickly. We'll see what happens.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you much. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.